Today we're going to be taking a look at why people love Klipsch, and specifically the brand new RP-600M2s. At the end, I'll compare these to some competitors' offerings, as well as the previous RP-600M, and see if it still has that Klipsch sound. So for full disclosure, these were sent to me by Audio Advice. I am allowed to say whatever I want, and they did not review this prior. So what is the Klipsch sound? Is it their horn? Is it their high sensitivity spec? Which they are being more forthright about, since they do use a method that's different from what most people consider the standard. If I think back on some previous Klipsch speakers and what they had in common, they had a treble rise with a flat target in-room response, which caused them to sound bright. That's until I reviewed the 5s, which had a downward sloping in-room response. The previous 600Ms weren't the most linear and had a dip in the response where the woofer crosses over to the horn, but this version fixes those issues. So it's hard to pinpoint one specific sound that defines the Klipsch sound, but if I were to say it has to be the horns, I doubt that they're gonna ever create a speaker without horns, but I could be wrong. So quickly on the visual side of things, it looks almost the same as the original RP-600Ms. The most notable thing to me was the addition of the cables for the dual binding posts in the back, instead of the typical flat metal connectors that you see with most speakers. I thought that was a nice touch. I'm not a big fan of biamping, but you do have the option if you want to do that. I prefer to use those extra channels of amplification for something else. I also think it's just too easy to accidentally put too much power to the tweeter and accidentally blow out that speaker. Also on the bottom, they have cork to keep it from sliding around, which they also had on the 5s as well. As far as the fit and finish, everything looks good. I've been impressed with most of the products that I've seen from Klipsch so far. They always look good and they are always finished well. Okay, let's talk about sound quality, starting off with the bass. I think it's important to start off with the bass because it determines how we perceive the overall tonality of the speaker. The thing I noticed was that this is a pretty large enclosure, so I expected more bass output. It's not that the bass was bad on these, it's just that I expected more considering the enclosure size. Also, I remember the RP-600Ms did have more bass than these as far as deep bass extension. Now this was done in a 20 by 20 foot space, and so this is a large space for a pair of bookshelf speakers running full range. That of course affects how the bass responds in my room. I'm also used to hearing my theater system in this room consisting of 13 speakers and 3 subwoofers, so I keep that in mind when I'm doing these reviews, but I think it's important to let you guys know just so you can have an idea of what my possible biases are. I do think that if I were to place these in a smaller room near a wall or maybe in a corner, that could enhance the bass to the point where it might be too much bass. So keep that in mind when it comes to bass. It's highly dependent on where you place the speakers within the room, the size of that room, and where you are placed relative to those speakers. As far as mid-range and treble, everything seemed okay. Nothing stood out to me as problematic. In fact, I was pretty surprised with the treble response. To me, I'm not used to hearing speakers with horns that I particularly like, but these sounded smooth and yeah, very linear. I actually like the way that the treble sounded on this. Now the mid-range and treble was a bit high for my taste. I prefer a warmer speaker, meaning a speaker with more bass than treble. But yeah, overall, I didn't see it as too much of a problem. I do think that some people who prefer a warmer response like I do might think that maybe it has a little too much mid-range and treble just because it doesn't have a ton of bass. So about those famous horn waveguide tweeters, they did seem to play loud without any distortion. So that's one thing I did notice from other Klipsch speakers as well. The horn does help with efficiency when playing higher frequencies at loud volumes. Nothing about them sounded fatiguing in the short term or long term, and the high sounded pretty clean to me. Like the originals, the horns did seem very directional, meaning that aiming them made a big difference. Now this type of narrow directivity might be good for some of you who don't have a ton of room treatment like most people, and so you'll get more direct sound and less sound reflecting off the sidewalls. So as far as soundstage and imaging, I thought that they did a good job as long as they were aimed properly. It really made a huge difference just by towing them in or out. I do feel that I've reviewed other speakers with better soundstage and imaging, but again, that could be my room and the way that these speakers interact with my room. So it's very important to know that, because you may find some speakers that interact with your room better than they do in my room and vice versa. It's just important to know about directivity. So a common question is whether these are worth it at $749 for a pair. where the first ones initially came out around $4.99 and sometimes that even go on sale for $3.49 for a pair. So that's a tough call. It really depends on what you're going to be using these for. If it's for a 2-channel setup where you don't plan on using DSP or adding a sub, I would recommend maybe going with the newer versions because they have a more linear response. If you're planning to have these connected in maybe a home theater setup or something where you're going to be using room correction or DSP to correct the frequency response, you can do that with the original RP-600Ms and remove that dip in the response. So it's a very inexpensive way to get a good sound, and maybe with that extra money that you've saved, you could buy a nice sub. By the way, you should use a sub for the new versions as well. So overall, my takeaway is that I was pretty impressed with the linearity of the speaker, especially on the top end, and you can see that from my measurements as well. Compared to some of their competitors, these are priced slightly high in my opinion. There's just a lot of competition at this price point, with some speakers measuring slightly better and having more bass. But again, these are no slouch. It's just not a slam dunk when you can get a pair of floor standing monolith Encore T6s for the same price. But those aren't Klipsch speakers, so if the Klipsch heritage or having Klipsch only speakers is important to you, then I wouldn't mind recommending the RP-600M2s. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in purchasing these. So quickly, let's go ahead and put this on the speaker leaderboard. Right, so here we are at the speaker leaderboard, and these fit into a few categories. First, best bookshelf. Here's the original RP-600M. I think it's better than the originals. And so somewhere over here, now this is not exact, this is just kind of general placement so you can kind of see what's above it here. And so this is also including functionality. These are some passive speakers, so they might not score as well as some active speakers. But, you know, as you guys know, I like bass. So the more bass something has, the higher it's going to score for me. In addition to bass, I also want to make sure that it's a pretty neutral response. I think it's a more neutral response than some of these. I'm going to put it real close to these Heiko Auroras. I know they're owned by the same parent company, so yeah, I want to put it like somewhere around here. Above or below, I'm not too sure. Let's just put it above maybe. So somewhere around here is a good idea. Best under $1,000, they're going to be above the RP-600Ms. And again, it's kind of tough here. This is just generally speaking. You know, there might be some with more functionality, better looks, things like that. So just kind of looking in this area, you can see that it's right up there with other speakers in its price range. Main competitor is the Polk Audio Reserve R200, just because they're very similar in price. But I like the Polk Reserve just because, again, it had more deep bass extension. Somewhere around here, some may say that the ELAC might be better in some ways because it's a concentric design. And so just take this with a grain of salt. And finally, best overall sound regardless of price, I'm going to put it above the original RP-600Ms. And again, I would say right around here next to these other ones. So I'll place it above the Heikos for right now. Somewhere around there, I think you guys get an idea. So that's it. Unfortunately, I don't have the original RP-600Ms to compare it to because those were caught in a storage fire. So the initial question was, why do people love Klipsch? Do they love the Klipsch sound? Do they love the company? What is it about them? One thing I can say is that I do appreciate that they continue to evolve. They continue to try to improve the previous products. I think that this one is a better product than the previous version. And to me, that's why people love Klipsch. Because as a company, they retain their badass persona of the company that doesn't care whether you piss off your neighbors. They maintain their previous heritage line, and they continue to evolve on those products and add new products to their lineup. The look and feel of the products may look like they stay the same, but the company seems to embrace change. They're one of the first companies that I've ever seen that used HDMI ARC on powered speakers on the 5s. They're one of the first non-studio monitor speaker companies to embrace powered speakers in general, as well as the use of DSP. And I know hardcore audiophiles will cringe, but they also have soundbars. This is a company that adapts to changes in consumer demands while staying true to their own values. And I can respect that. So that's my review of the Klipsch RP-600M2s. If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. That's it. Take care. Bye-bye.